Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter, and this episode is part of the Advisor Growth Series, where my partner in this project is Jay Hummel of the Wealth Advisor Growth Network. Jay, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, for those listening on the podcast, this is a first for us. We are recording this live as we are also broadcasting it on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. It's quite the experiment. We're doing this so that hopefully next year, you guys will have an opportunity to ask Jay and other guests that I bring on to the podcast questions in real time about the content that we are delivering. So as we start to live stream these podcasts, I want you to know that every episode is designed to add value to your business as a financial advisor. If you've never listened before, we don't pitch products on this show. So for this episode, we're talking about 2020 and potential changes and forecasts that we might see happening in the industry. Jay, one of the things you mentioned in our pre-show is M&A multiple changes. What are your thoughts?
I think we had an amazing year in 2019 on the number of deals, the combinations, breakaways. I think that's going to continue in 2020, but I also think we're going to continue to see a barbell happen in multiples and in valuations of firms. And I think that's going to be driven by growth. And obviously, we wouldn't be doing this podcast series if we weren't trying to help advisors or firms grow. The problem is many firms aren't growing if you take the market performance out. And so those firms are going to continue to be less valuable. And the firms that are growing, because there are such a few number of them, with the amount of private equity money that's now in the industry, you're going to see those multiples continue to go up. You're going to see the firms that aren't growing continue to go down. And I think we're going to end up with a continued barbell effect in the transactions that we see in the marketplace next year.
Yeah, so logically that makes sense. Firms that are driving organic growth are going to get a better multiple. What's interesting is you think that the firms that aren't doing it are going to have their multiple is going to get hurt to the downside. What are a couple things that advisory firms could do as they roll into 2020 to mitigate some of that if they're interested in an M&A transaction?
Yeah, I think the second piece, the second thing that I know we want to talk about, so I'll put the two together here. The second piece is we've talked a lot as an industry over the last probably 10 years about succession issues. And we were very, very early, I think. But I think next year is going to be the first year when you look at the demographics, when you look at the lack of growth in many firms. If you're a small to medium-sized firm and you don't have a successor, you're going to have a problem with valuation, depending on who you might ultimately want to exit to, transition to. And so the fastest growing firms, regardless of size, one of the things that they have is they have a clear successor or a successor team or a clear succession plan to drive the future growth of their firm.
Identifying, finding, and training that talent is such a challenge. What are some of the best practices that you could see firms executing on in 2020 to find that next generation advisor and get them up to speed so that they can add that as the growth component to have an impact on their multiple?
So the first thing you have to decide is, what are you looking for? And I think there's a disconnect today. As many successors who have grown up in this business are planning centric. They tend to be CFP driven. They tend to want to drive and serve customers. They may not be the hunter, the person who's going out and driving growth like the founder of these firms did. So I think if I'm a founder of a firm, if I'm 58 to 60 years old, I'm thinking about the long-term value. First of all, I need to define what I want. And I think going out and trying to find a growth-minded individual who wants to go out and try to grow that firm like you did, they're kind of like unicorns in some ways. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of them. But they're the key. So just determining what you want in a successor, and that way you can be very specific about when you go to the market to try to hire them.
Yeah, it's so difficult. I started in the business in the mid-90s in a Dean Witter bullpen, and you made it if you were a good salesperson. Did not matter what type of market acumen you had. If you could sell Georgia Power Preferred or muni bonds, you were able to slowly build a book of business over time. And I have to say, if you're joining a firm and your first priority is business development, it's a losing proposition if you don't have the right resources in place. The wirehouses have known it for years, and that's why they try and do it at scale. Hire as many people as they can, get their family and friends accounts, and if they make it, they make it. If they don't, they don't. I'm hoping that the RIA industry takes a different approach to that, and they're able to find folks roles that help them learn the business. I think one of the leading drivers of that is the proliferation of the newly minted CFPs out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think this year was a record year for new CFPs. These are folks that are technically proficient. They might not be able to cold call and sell muni bonds like we did in the 90s, but they can sit down with the client and add real value. And just finding the opportunities to get them those at bats could really help drive firm growth.
Well, yeah, two really quick things on that. Organic growth solves a lot of problems, right? It makes you a much more likely target for inorganic, but it also allows successors to want to come to your firm, and also position yourself as willing to share equity. If you're unwilling to share equity, I'm not talking about in the first 6 months, nobody expects that, but positioning yourself in the marketplace that you want young successor talent to be owners in your firm, it sounds like that's obvious, but it would truly differentiate those listeners out there who are looking for successors in many markets in the United States.
Yeah, definitely. So another trend that I see exploding next year, Jay, is direct indexing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, helping advisors build out their model portfolios. I've really noticed in the last 6 months, not only a trend to it, but I can see the clear benefits to it. And when I explain it to an advisory firm, they get it. They almost have an aha moment, especially in situations where they're competing with the vanguards and the do-it-yourselfers and that mindset. And the direct indexing model, because of the commission-free trading, the fractional shares that are coming from companies like Schwab, just make it easier. And then these advisors can go and create their own custom indexes based upon whatever value system they have for themselves and for their niches. And I'm curious, based on your experience this past year, have you seen any fee compression in the TAMPs as it relates to the ability to add these direct indexes for their advisors?
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see that fee. I do think that's one of the benefits of direct indexing, because you're creating a much cheaper product where you can also customize. I love this topic. I think you're right on to identify it. The firms that are going to grow faster next year are the firms that can scale their asset management piece, but also still customize at the client level. And direct indexing allows you to do that, especially what technology platform you're on. Be with the similar model, direct index, as you said, create a custom index, but then the ability to tax overlay, to put socially responsible investing or ESG screens and overlays over your direct index strategy, allows you to be cheaper, allows you to compete with the ETF and model fund companies in the big retail shops. And it allows you to look at a customer and say, we truly have created something customized to just you, but it allows you to do it at scale instead of creating an individual model for each one of your families.
And the tax alpha that a serious financial advisor could add to their client is incredible. I remember 20 years ago when I ran across Parametric and their portfolio engineers, as they called them. I thought that's just brilliant. But to implement that at scale or with any customization was not as possible back then, and really was driven through SMAs inside the wirehouses, or that was my experience with it. And now
where I've seen it really work is direct index in a UMA chassis. So that way you're allowed, it's easy to swap out the sleeves. So you could have multiple indexes across one account. And so I think the proliferation, it's why I think you're seeing it in many of the wires moving towards the UMA construct of being able to do it in one account. And so I think that's another trend I think we'll continue to see, not only direct indexing, but what kind of wrapper you put it in. And you and I've talked it before on the podcast. I believe tax alpha, whether it's Vanguard, whether it's Morningstar, whether it's Envestnet, all have done these studies about advisor alpha. And you look at tax sensitivity and the ability to tax manage, all those studies say it's at least 100 basis points a year in value to the end customer. So it's a big deal to be able to put that on top of a direct index.
Next, let's talk about Reg BI. And so compliance is going to be needed by the end of June next year. What are your thoughts on the implications of Reg BI next year?
Well, I'd like to be a compliance consultant. Being in public accounting back when Sarbanes-Oxley, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. We made a lot of money when regulations changed. So I think our friends like Chris Wynn and others are going to be extremely busy next year. I'm glad, you watch Michael Kitces, and, I have a lot of respect for Michael and a lot of those industry, voices who are out bantering, this
he's
topic.
suing the SEC.
Yeah, back and forth. Look, I think back to why advisors grow or don't grow. Of course, it's a big deal for our industry. Of course, you and I always talk about customers should get better service from their financial advisors and their firms. But if you're the average advisor, if you have a great attorney, you have a great compliance consultant, let them worry about it. I've always said the regulations to me is I want to build firms, and I want to be affiliated with firms. And I know you do too, and I know our listeners do, to build the kind of firm that our parents, that our best friends, that our family members would be serviced extremely well by. And I just think we get into an argument. It's so hard to define best interest. It's so hard to argue about disclosure. I just hope we have an industry where firms just continue to try to get it right, regardless of what the regulation says. But I know that may sound Pollyannish and a guy that grew up in the Midwest, but I just think that's we get too wrapped up and waste our time arguing about the, and I think if we just spent more time serving our clients, our firms would grow faster.
Well, there's always going to be bad actors in any field at any given time. I think the challenge with Reg BI next year will be the fact that several states are suing the SEC. Michael Kitces and the XY Planning Network are suing the SEC. And for disclosure, I'm a member of that network. I'm afraid that they're going to get aggressive with enforcement to try and prove that it does have teeth. And of course, that's only going to impact the bad actors. So I guess I shouldn't say I'm afraid of it, but I do think it's something that if you don't have all your I's dotted and T's crossed, if you don't have folks like Chris Wynn and the compliance consultants helping you make sure things are buttoned up, it could be really challenging in the second half of the year.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you want to be first. And to your point, I think they're going to want to make an example. I hope they make an example out of the people that truly are doing it wrong, or intentionally doing it wrong, and not try to make the example of someone who just was trying to do it right, but forgot to fill out the paperwork.
Yep, that's right. Lastly, let's talk about the Secure Act. Obviously, I think it's probably going to be signed into law by the president next year. It has implications for our industry. What are your thoughts?
I think in the end, it's probably good, right? At a global level, more people, easier access. It's likely going to be cheaper for small employers and people that work at small companies to access retirement capabilities. I worry about the annuity piece to that. There's that, I think it got slipped in potentially. I think it's easier to put products into those plans, which always worries me. And so I think retirement specialists are there's going to be a proliferation of need for really, really good experts in the field in the retirement space. And I also think a downstream implication that I haven't heard people talk about is what's it do to the simple IRA platforms? You look at Fidelity, you look at the banks, they all have very, very profitable, simple IRA platforms. And most of those are used by small business owners because they couldn't access a MEP. And now that MEPs may become more common, I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of the larger retail shops or sort of the community banks deal with the impact of their simple IRA platforms.
Yeah, I have two takeaways from it if it goes through. First, the $5,000 tax credit is an incredible incentive for small businesses to start offering this to their employees, which is just a win-win. My concern is over the advisor that's kind of a part-time 401k retirement plan consultant. Maybe they have a plan or two, and the complexity of all of these retirement plans is really, really speaks to the need to have a specialist. And whether you insource it in your firm and you have somebody who can go deep on it, or you outsource to somebody that can help you do it, I just haven't found a whole lot of firms that are willing to do that yet. They think they can be a part-time retirement plan expert. And I think that's going to have some implications as this rolls through the year.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I'm anxious to see what the distributors do. So do the insurance companies go create their own maps? You have, payroll record keepers like ADP. Do they go create maps, or do they stay out of it, and do they partner? I think it's going to be really interesting to your point, not only at the advisory level, but at the distributor level. Do they partner? Do they compete individually with individual maps? I think it's going to be a wild 2020 once the president signs that.
Yeah, that's right. All right, before we wrap up, this is our last broadcast of the year. A really important question in this industry, and really in all industries, is Die Hard a Christmas movie, Jay?
I argue it is, because then it makes it easier to have your family watch it at Christmas. But I say yes, I consider it a Christmas movie.
Listen, man, there are two types of people in the world: those that believe Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and those that are just wrong. All right. As we wrap this up, next year, Jay and I have some big plans for this advisor growth series. We're going to produce 24 episodes. Jay's committed to doing 2 a month next year. We're going to continue to bring you great content and strategies that we're seeing work out in the field as it relates to advisor growth. We're also going to start interviewing industry thought leaders who are going to come on and share their thoughts. Each episode will be product-free and just designed to bring you as much value as possible. We appreciate you listening. You can catch all the episodes live on the social media handles. And of course, we will always broadcast this as a podcast. All right, Jay, appreciate you doing that with us this year, and looking forward to next year.
It's been a great year. So thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this. Hopefully we're providing value. Please give us feedback if we're not. Hope you and your families have great holiday breaks, and let's have a great 2020 together.
The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice and should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult an attorney or tax advisor. Resilient Wealth LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Resilient Wealth and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For Resilient Wealth information, please visit Investment Advisor's public disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov by searching Resilient Wealth CRD number 30.